you for joining. Every year, God again, saying that
Your audio is not good right now. It's very choppy.
I see. I'll switch off and back again. Nonsense. Is it better now?
Yes.
Yes, good, good. How's it now? Okay, good. How's it now? Okay, so let's try it. I'm using the microphone of my laptop now. With the microphone, sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes I'm not so lucky, and recently, more often than not, I'm not so lucky. Anyway, I'm gonna continue with my talk on the Hanya Shigyo. Let me share the screen. I use the translation that I always use. So here you find the original, you find the Japanese translation, and you find an English translation by Thich Nhat Hanh. Let me read the original the way you would read it in Japanese. Kanji zai bosatsu gyojin hanya haramita ji shoken goun kaiku do issai kuyaku. Shalishi shiki fui ku fui shiki sokuze ku sokuze shiki juso gyo yaku shiki juso gyo shiki yaku bunyo ze. Shalishi ze shoho kuso fusho fumetsu fuku fujo fuzo fugen. That's the part that I talked about until yesterday, and here starts the new part. Ze kokuchu mushiki mu ju so gyo shiki mu gen ni bi ze shin I mu shiki shoko mi soku ho mu genkai naishi mu I shiki kai mu mu myo yaku mu mu myo jin naishi muro shi yaku muro shi jin mu ku shu metsu do. Up to here, the first part I talked about several times, Avalokiteshvara, and in this case that means you. When this one person practices deep prajna paramita, which means Zazen, which means letting go of everything, then this one person will realize that everything is empty. And this realization at the same time means liberation from all suffering. The whole suffering that I created myself, it's empty. It's something that I created out of sand, so to speak. And then Avalokiteshvara starts to preach to Shariputra, and I said that both Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra stand for the two sides of ourselves. Shariputra is the part that still is attached to this idea, but I want enlightenment. I need to solve my problem. Buddhism, I need to practice Buddhism so that I get liberated in the first place. And at first, Avalokiteshvara says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And about that, I talked several times. Then last time we came to this part when Avalokiteshvara says, Shariputra, because everything is empty, there is nothing that's born and there's nothing that's extinguished. Nothing that's pure and nothing that can be called dirty. There's no, how do you say? Let me take a look at the English translation. No increasing nor decreasing. So this one emptiness, it's not getting bigger or smaller. This is one thing. And then that's where today's section starts. Here in the original, you have this character mu, or wu, I think it's in Japanese, which means no or not. A very strong form of denial. Literally, Avalokiteshvara says, because everything exists in emptiness, there is no form. Before it was form is emptiness, emptiness is form. But here Avalokiteshvara says something that sounds even stronger. There is no form. There is no perception. There is no grasping. There's no reaction to that which we grasp. There's no consciousness. So the 5 skandhas are negated. None of these 5 skandhas really exist. And then next, the 6 sense organs are negated, which are eyes. So Avalokiteshvara says there are no eyes, there are no ears, there's no nose, there's no tongue, and there's no mental perception. As you might know, in Buddhism, it's not 5 senses, but 6 senses, because our mental functioning is also counted, which might sound a little bit surprising because in the West, we only count those sense organs with which we get information from the outside world. But when you do sit Zazen, you might realize that your mind is also functioning like a dream catcher. You sit with the intention of not thinking, but then you catch all these thoughts and memories that come up. Of course, those don't come from the outside world, like what you see and what you hear, but in a way you could say it's another sense organ, and that's why the Buddhists count our mental apparatus as sense organ number 6. So Avalokiteshvara says there is no sense organ, there is no mind in this case. And then the next 6 things which are denied here is what we perceive through the sense organs. So in the case of the eyes, it's form or color. In the case of the ears, it's sound. In the case of the nose, it's smell. In the case of the tongue, it's flavor, taste. In the case of the body, it's touch. And in the case of the consciousness, the mind apparatus, the Indians would call it dharma. So a teaching, a principle, a thought, you could say, everything that we perceive with the mind. And Avalokiteshvara says these 6 also don't exist. So there's no form, there is no sound, there's no smell, there's no flavor, there's no touch, and there is no dharma to be perceived. And maybe up to here for the time being, and after Xuanzang translates, I will try to explain how I interpret this.
老师刚刚把前面的稍微总结了一下，然后又讲了2句新的。前面老师讲到了，就是我们第一句观自在菩萨，这个观音其实指的就是你，我们之前反复提到了。然后后面讲的行深般若波罗蜜多时，这个时候其实指的就是坐禅，就是这个人他在坐禅的时候非常深入的练习修行的时候。就会参悟到一切皆空，然后我们从痛苦当中获得自由。然后上次我们其实说到了，观音他讲到了诸法真相，我看对，诸法真相就是，一切没有增减，没有干净或者是不干净，不生不减，不垢不净，不增不减，这些它前面指的是不，就是没有。是一个否定的词，而后面我们今天老师又讲的，就是观音他其实在这个不的基础上又加强了语气，他用一个完全否定的一个无，就是中文里面那个无没有，就是比之前那个不好像更加强烈的一个语气在说，就是说我们之前说的五蕴，故空中无色、无受、无想、无形、无识，就是这五蕴其实也是根本不存在的。后面讲的这应该是，刚刚老师说的是感受六感，其实中文是不是翻译成了六根？好像就是后面的眼、耳、鼻、舌、身、意，这6个感觉，就是我们说的六根，也是完全不存在的。我们平时说的感觉呢是五感，但是在佛教里面它指的是六感，因为它把最后的意当成一个感觉。虽然意是从外界来的，但是它是外界给你一个思想的，让你有的一个想法，让你升起的一个想法，所以它也是属于一感。然后后面呢又有6个，这6个呢是我们接收这个世界的6个，就是色、无声、无香、无味，就无色声香味触法，它没有形式，没有声音，没有香味，没有味道，没有感觉，或还有就是我们说的业，这些也都是不存在的。然后刚刚老师讲到这儿，然后老师可能还会往下再讲。
Thank you. Let me share the screen once more. First of all, I'd like to explain what Avalokiteshvara is denying here. Basically, it's a fairly complicated or fairly complex system of what in Western philosophy we would call epistemology, a theory of how we perceive the world. Here, this would be the Japanese or Chinese version. First, on the left side here are the 6 things that we build the world of, which are form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and dharma. In the middle are the sense organs: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the brain or the mind. And then on the right side, I think these are not mentioned explicitly in the Hanya Shingyo, but basically in Buddhism, we, how do you say, postulate that there are 6 different consciousnesses for each of the 6 organs. So we have a visual consciousness, we have a hearing, acoustic consciousness, we have a smelling consciousness, tasting consciousness, feeling consciousness, and a mental consciousness. And then later, there's a 7th consciousness that unifies these and say, well, basically we think it's the same me that sees and the same me that perceives the sound. But on a more subtle level, actually, these are 2 consciousnesses that are later unified in one me consciousness. And, well, interestingly, Avalokiteshvara says none of these really exist. There is no such consciousness. There is no eye, no ear. There's no form. There is no sound, no smell. And what does Avalokiteshvara mean when he or she says that? Because in daily life, obviously, there is sound. We hear forms. We have a consciousness. How can Avalokiteshvara claim that this is not existing? One possibility is like, I have now these red stuff here. Why? I don't know. Whatever. Let's have a look at the explanation that Thich Nhat Hanh gives, which is the following. He says, body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness are not separate self-entities. And then the 18 realms is what I just explained. The 6 senses, the 6 objects of the senses, and the 6 consciousnesses that arise when the sense organ and the object meet. These are the 18 realms. They are also not separate self-entities. I think what Thich Nhat Hanh wants to say here is basically everything exists through what in Buddhism is called mutual, how do you say, dependent, interdependent origination. So nothing exists out of itself. Everything exists as a result of countless factors. So everything is influenced by other things, and there's no independent self-entity. And that makes it easy to understand what Avalokiteshvara wants to say here, because that's basically Buddhist, how do you say, common knowledge. Nothing is independent. All things depend on all of each other. But on the other hand, that claim is not very strong, because that's what Buddhists have said all the time. And probably that's something that Shariputra, because he is the wisest of the Buddha's disciples, that's probably something that Shariputra would have known. Everything only exists in relation to other things. I would read this part maybe a little bit stronger. Shariputra stands for the intellectual self, for this part of ourselves that wants to understand, that is still looking for liberation. In a way, you could say that Shariputra stands for old Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism. And in Theravada Buddhism, this very complex, theory of the mind was developed. And Avalokiteshvara here stands for a form of Buddhism that throws all of that into the garbage. So basically, when Avalokiteshvara says there's no form, there's no sound, there are no eyes, there are no ears, there's no consciousness. Basically, Avalokiteshvara say, forget it, forget all these tools, forget all the theory that you made up. It's all bullshit. That's the way I read this mu. Not like, of course, it's possible to read it like Thich Nhat Hanh. They are not separate self-entities. But for me, that's something that Shariputra would say. That's something that Shariputra say. And Avalokiteshvara would say, bullshit, bullshit, forget it, forget it. There's still a third possible interpretation. Avalokiteshvara, the name of this bodhisattva, is translated into Chinese in two different ways. One in Japanese would be kan-on, which means, or kan-ze-on, which means the bodhisattva that is seeing the sounds of the world. Maybe this name or this translation is the most famous in East Asia. The bodhisattva that sees the sounds of the world. So then the question is, if Avalokiteshvara is the one that sees the sounds, how is it possible that there are no eyes and ears, there are no sounds and there are no forms? There must be eyes and ears for Avalokiteshvara to see and hear. There must be forms and sounds. The character mu, which means nothing, can also mean limitless. For example, my name is Muho, which means no direction, but also it means open in all directions. So when Avalokiteshvara says no seeing, no hearing, maybe the bodhisattva also means open your eyes, open your ears, and see the whole world without the filter of your concepts. Forget all the theory. Forget that filter through which you saw reality. See it just as you saw it as you were a kid. So that would be a third possible interpretation here. No seeing, no hearing means to see with fresh eyes and hear with fresh ears like a kid. Or second possibility, forget that bullshit. Or the first possibility, Thich Nhat Hanh. Everything depends on other things and nothing is really independent. Okay, maybe up to here, and after Schwanzan's translation, if you have questions or things to share, then please do so.
老师刚刚说了一下那个六境六根，就是其实是有理论，佛教是有理论基础的，就是我们前面说的那个色，我看看哪儿去了，色受想行识六境，色声香味触法，这个是无色声香味触法，其实指的就是六境，是没有这个六个境界的。然后后面又讲到了眼耳鼻舌身意哈，就是这个指的是六根。那个我们这个里面其实那观音他说没有六根，其实也是不存在的。然后佛教里面其实有一个理论是六识，虽然心经里面没有提到，但是其实这也是一个非常基础的一个理论。这个六识指的就是刚刚说的六根，相对于六根产生的一些意识，比如说你的眼识、耳识、鼻识、舌识、身识，还有意识，其实是有意识。你的眼睛是有意识的，耳朵是有意识的，鼻子、舌头这些其实都是有意识的，这佛教的一个概念。那其实这个六境加六根，其实又产生了12处，就是不同的环境加上不同的我们的感觉，其实你就会有12个不一样的处，指是地方哈，12处。然后这六境六根加六意呢，就会产生18界，就是你不同的环境，用不同的感受，然后它产生了一个意识，就会产生18界。那我们后面这个地方他说的是无哈，无这个词就是不存在的，也就是说，其实这一些 我们一般理论里面讲的这些，那观音说它其实都是不存在的。那他现在提到这儿，其实是有什么意义呢？你看我们的日常生活当中其实是有的，你是可以看到、可以听到的，然后你也是可以到达这些境界的。然后你的眼睛呢、耳朵呀也是有意识。那为什么这个地方他说到却没有呢？老师给了3个答案。第一个就是说，其实是不分家的，就是我们所谓的六境、六根，还有刚刚讲的60哈，就是我们所谓的这些，其实它都是不分家的，是相互影响的，不可能独立存在。所以它虽然我们提到了18界，但是这18界其实它存在又不存在，因为它们相互影响。越南有一个禅师叫 Thich Nhat Hanh，应该是这个翻译啊，我那个发音可能不太准，就是非常有名儿，他最近可能刚刚过世，就非常有名儿的一个禅师。然后这是他提出来的一个，就是说，当然佛教里面有很多地方都提到了，其实我们各个就是各种境界啊，它都不是它存在又不存在，它都不是独立存在的。所以这个是一个。还有第二个就是说，其实小乘佛教和大乘佛教呢，有一些理论呢是不一样的，而且差别非常大。那在这个地方，他提到了无，就说没有这些，没有这些，又没有那些。其实他也是在提醒大家要忘记这些理论。实际上其实它根本是没有区别的。这是第二个。然后第三个，老师刚刚，呃，对，老师，其实我们是可以看到声音，然后它是有，但是又是没有的。所以你看，他提到了一个无，就是无就是没有嘛，还有一个线，就是线，还有界的意思。这个线就是有限、无限的，其实他提到的就是一个无限的一个含义。然后第三个呢，老师就是说，其实你看，我们虽然有眼睛、有耳朵、有鼻子哈，就这些不同的感官，包括你的意识，但其实你要忘记这些感官，重新打开你的眼睛，打开你的耳朵，去看看这个真实的世界，而不要被这些不要被你的这些感官感受，还有各种我们所说的这个18界、12处所迷惑，让你用全新的眼光、全新的耳朵去看这个世界。所以刚刚老师讲的这3个，然后有问题大家可以提啊。
Thank you. So, if you have questions or anything you would like to share, you're welcome to do so. Tanya, please.
The second possibility of interpretation, this forget this bullshit, is it just be this or just move? Do you mean it like that?
Well, forget the whole theory that you built up of Buddhism, of your life, of practice. For example, in the case of Zen, what Zazen means, what Satori means. Forget it and live this day, live your life more directly. So I think, well, the Hanya Shingyo, the Heart Sutra, was, how do you say, created at a time where Buddhism was in a time of change. And so I hear in the Hanya Shingyo, I hear this kind of voice. It's almost like a punk movement, like in the late 70s. Forget all this hippie music and get back to the roots. So I hear that kind of approach here. Forget all this difficult theory. Sit when you sit. Do the dishes when you do the dishes. Shariputra was just too smart. He was always kind of thinking about, well, there must be some meaning to this. Just like in Zen, you always get this question, but the Zen must be good for something. And enlightenment cannot be bullshit. The Buddha must have got something under the Bodhi tree. And it's not wrong, but I mean, it's exactly this kind of thinking. It must be good for something that gets you out of the practice. So that's why I hear Avalokiteshvara say to Shariputra, forget about all that. It must be good for something. It must have a meaning. Just do your thing now. Drink a cup of tea, as we would say in Zen. Have a cup of tea, taste the tea, and then get back to your work. Any other questions? Anything else?
Yes, for the six consciousness, yeah. They only can, you need sense organ and contact to an object, and then the consciousness arise. But this would mean we have only these six consciousness, and this consciousness is always depending to something else.
Yes.
So there is no absolute consciousness, yeah, which depends on nothing.
Yes.
And for me, this is a contradiction to this Zen master, Huang Po, yeah. Huang Po is always speaking from an absolute mind, yeah. That is not conditioned, yeah. How I can bring this together, I do not understand.
Well, you don't have to bring it together.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Well, if you try to bring everything together, it's very complicated.
So Huang Po is right, and the other guys are all right. Yeah. Okay, I can live with it.
Let Huang Po be Huang Po, and the Heart Sutra the Heart Sutra.
Okay, thank you.
Diane, you were also raising your hand.
Hello, Muho. I don't know if this is a connection at all, but it is emotions and feelings at all addressed in this process?
Are they addressed, you mean?
Yes, I mean, is it brought into it in any way, you know, as like the senses are emotions or feelings, or is that I'm trying to put that all together in this.
Yeah, I think
letting go.
Emotions are part of what Avalokiteshvara talks about. So I think they would also be part of the 5 skandhas, maybe number 3 or so, or maybe number 4.
Okay.
So we need to also let go of these. Don't cling to your emotions either. You don't have to deny them, of course, but it's not about clinging or analyzing the emotions. You feel these emotions, you have these sense perceptions, and that was my interpretation 3. It's also important to open up. So you don't have to deny them, but rather you open up to your emotions, to your senses, without clinging to them. But emotions are also a vital part of your reality, your emotions and the emotions of others. And when Avalokiteshvara sees the sounds of the world, basically the Bodhisattva understands the emotions of the world. I think that's the point of the name, seeing the sounds of the world.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else you would like to ask or share? Nothing? Next week in Japan is the Ocean Day, Umi no Hi. But if it's okay for Schwansan, I would say as a regular. And next week I would get back to you by Sawaki Roshi. And then in 2 weeks we would get back to the Hanya Shinyo. So thank you for joining today. Thank you for your questions. Have a nice week. And thank you for Schwanzan for hosting us. Hoping to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.